You're watching BBC News. Caught me by surprise last hour. Let's bring you the headlines. Now, the Health Secretary warns that coronavirus cases are likely to rise as restrictions are lifted in England, but says people have to live with risk, and he hopes to manage the virus like the flu in the future. Concern from pub landlords after the Prime Minister says it could be down to individual pubs to bar drinkers who arrive without proof of vaccination.
You will have to have extra staff to be checking on the door. You will have to have the cost of workplace testing to be borne. 70% of our businesses are SMEs and simply won't be able to manage this cost for reopening.
As EU leaders meet to decide their next move over export restrictions, AstraZeneca expresses anger at being caught in the middle of the vaccine row. Over 50s and those in at-risk categories are being urged to book their COVID-19 jabs before a predicted dip in supplies. A Royal Navy jet has crashed into a field in Cornwall. The two pilots ejected from the plane and have been taken to hospital. A year later than planned, the torch relay for the delayed Tokyo Olympics finally gets underway in Japan. Good afternoon and welcome to BBC News. The Health Secretary has said that coronavirus cases are likely to rise as lockdown eases, but that he hopes we will be able to manage coronavirus like flu. Speaking in the House of Commons in the last hour, Matt Hancock said we will have to live with the risk and that he sees continued efforts like mask wearing as a personal responsibility. Our political correspondent Helen Catt is in Westminster for us now. Helen, what's he been saying?
Yeah, as you said, MPs are debating the extension of powers that the government took last year under the Coronavirus Act, which allowed them to take certain responses to try and manage coronavirus. They're also looking at the legislation that will underpin the roadmap for England, those sort of steps that move out of lockdown. And of course, the big debate around this has been the continuation of putting in what are some very restrictive restrictions on our lives versus the necessity to do that because the pandemic isn't over. Now, Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, has been saying that this is a way of starting. He hopes to put the pandemic behind us, and he gave a clue about how he expects coronavirus to be managed in the future. Have a listen to what he said.
Yeah, well, we clearly want to lift these measures as soon as is reasonably possible, and my goal is that we will eventually see COVID as something that has to be managed rather like flu. We don't put in place restrictions on normal life to tackle flu, but we do have a regular vaccination programme, and that is where I hope, with vaccines, that we're able to get to.
Now, there have been a number of MPs who've already in the debate expressed some of their concerns about extending these powers, talking about authoritarianism and worried about the length of time. This would extend these powers for another 6 months. And of course, the roadmap out of lockdown for England. Boris Johnson had said that he hoped to be able to remove all legal restrictions by June the 21st. So there has been some concern expressed, as there has been at every moment that the government has needed to extend powers like this. However, the legislation is almost certainly going to pass because Labour has said it will back it, albeit without enthusiasm, as the Shadow Health Secretary John Ashworth explained.
So we still have to work hard to break transmission chains. We still have to work hard to shut down opportunities for the virus to replicate. And given the loss of life we have suffered, and given the risks of mutations that could set us back, we must have zero tolerance to letting the virus rage unchecked. For that reason, we do accept that restrictions have to stay in place, and for that reason, we support the renewal of the Act and the public health regulations before us. But we do not support that renewal with any enthusiasm or relish.
Now, the Prime Minister yesterday, with this suggestion that maybe pub landlords would have to ban people if they didn't have proof of vaccination, it started a discussion. He's been accused by Labour of speaking on the hoof, but there does seem to be a change in mood, if you like, towards some sort of coronavirus passport.
Yes, this sense of a vaccine certificate, if you like, some way of proving that you have either been vaccinated or have been tested, or the Prime Minister was suggesting earlier, and Michael Gove in the Commons was suggesting that was also being looked at is what happens with the if you've developed immunity because you've actually had coronavirus. Now, the government, there is a review into this happening. Boris Johnson earlier suggested that is going to, there'll be some sort of update in early April on that work. What he said yesterday at the Liaison Committee, which is a committee of senior MPs, was that it could be up to individual landlords to look at this sort of condition. That's why Labour is saying it's these proposals have come out on the hoof. They say they would be happy to look at any government proposals on this. Like I said, it's being looked at currently. Boris Johnson said there are some complexities, moral complexities and ethical problems that would need to be addressed. He also suggested that if you wanted to go down that sort of route where everybody had to show a vaccine certificate, if you like, then that might only be possible once everybody has actually been offered the vaccine. The one area where he did seem to sound more, they're clearly not ruling this out, but the one area where he did seem to seem perhaps even more warm about it, though, was on the idea of international travel. Some other countries have suggested that they would want to see proof from British travellers to allow them in that they have been vaccinated or tested negative. And Boris Johnson has said he could see the arguments for that.
Helen, thank you very much. It's like she's just read what I'm supposed to read to you, because we're talking about pub operators and landlords. They're saying they are concerned about the possibility of customers having to prove they've been vaccinated. Let's get more on that now.
Pubs have had a long time to get ready to welcome back customers. They've had to change their layouts, reduce tables and ensure they're as COVID safe as possible. So soon to lockdown easing, the thought that they'll also have to ask customers to prove they've been jabbed hasn't gone down well.
What we do not want is the risk of additional costs being put onto our business, having to hire people on the door to monitor this, to exercise judgments. We want the ability to trade in the normal way.
A further issue is around pub staff and clientele, who are generally younger and therefore not yet eligible for vaccinations.
You've also got potential discrimination issues that arise in the workplace and in a customer setting where you might be discriminating against those people if you are demanding that they have COVID status certification before they can pop out for a coffee or pop into the pub.
Under the current lockdown easing timetable in England, outside socialising in limited groups will be allowed from April the 12th. And from the 17th of May, groups of 6 or any number from 2 households will be allowed to drink and eat indoors. The question is whether pubs will require customers to have a vaccine certificate, which the Prime Minister said this morning was being considered.
What we said is that we'll be reporting on the work of the certification group in early April, either on April the 5th or on April the 12th.
Desperate to get their doors back open again, the owner of this chain of nightclubs says having to show proof of vaccine could be workable.
Our demographic would probably accept it. It's a young customer base for us. They already walk around with ID, such as driving licence and passports, to get into a lot of our venues. And I don't think they'd have a problem with it. But I think it's a market forces thing, to be honest.
The night before the last lockdown, publicans and many customers are counting down the days until the drinks can start flowing again. But the road to reopening is far from straightforward. Sarah Campbell, BBC News.
EU leaders are discussing plans for extra controls on vaccine exports in an effort to improve the rollout of doses for member states. Boris Johnson has warned against blockades, which could affect the number of jabs sent here to the UK. But the European Commission says it would expand supply for all. Richard Galpin reports.
Here in this vaccine centre in Cologne, as in other parts of the European Union, there's only a handful of people. One key reason for that is a shortage of vaccine supplies. And this as the EU faces a third wave of coronavirus, which is sweeping through member states. Frustrated EU officials believe the UK has had an unfair advantage with the contracts for the AstraZeneca vaccine and are now threatening a ban of exports of the vaccine to the UK.
I don't think that we want to use it. I am optimistic that the joint agreement between the EU and UK, as well as the summit today, will help to solve the problem without entering a vaccine war. But again, EU has been the biggest exporter.
But London and Brussels are now trying to cool tensions, with a statement saying they're working on specific steps they can take to create a win-win situation and expand vaccine supplies for all their citizens.
I don't want to see blockades of vaccines or of medicines. I don't think that's the way forward, either for us or for any of our friends.
The EU meeting this afternoon is focusing on ways to increase the vaccine supply and improve the distribution across the 27 countries.
I think it should be made perfectly clear that the EU does not have a problem with the UK. The EU has a problem with AstraZeneca, because AstraZeneca is not fulfilling their promises, their contractual obligations.
It's vital in this pandemic that all countries work together to tackle the virus. Vaccine nationalism could prove very damaging.
You cannot wrap a flag around a vaccine in this modern world. It just doesn't work that way. These are integrated supply chains, and any attempt to impose any barriers whatsoever will disadvantage everybody involved.
At today's meeting, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel will also highlight the need for more vaccines to be made in the EU itself to tackle the supply problems. Richard Galpin, BBC News.
Our correspondent in Brussels, Nick Beake, has been watching the virtual summit between European leaders.
Well, the 27 EU leaders are engrossed in their video call. They're trying to come up with a solution to the vaccination crisis that really has engulfed this continent. We know that the rate of vaccination is much slower compared to countries like the United Kingdom, for example, 4 times slower in that case. And so there are no easy fixes. What we are seeing, though, if not division, a change of approach between different EU countries. On the one hand, you've got Italy and France. They're very keen to go ahead, it would seem, with the sort of proposals the European Commission was talking about yesterday. That's to say, tightening export controls on vaccines leaving European soil. On the other hand, you've got the Swedes and the Belgians. They're saying that any sort of restrictions could have a pretty bad effect, really, on vaccinations and the component parts of vaccines, and notably the very delicate global supply chains. That's something they want to avoid. At the same time, Angela Merkel, of course, is on the call, the German Chancellor. She's defended the approach that the European Union has taken. That's to say, this idea of joint procurement, working together rather than individually. And she really pointed the finger of blame in some ways at the United Kingdom and the United States, saying that those two countries are not really exporting any finished vaccines at all, and that's not helping matters. We know that President Biden will be joining the call a little later on, so maybe he'll want to talk to Mrs. Merkel and others about that. Another interesting dimension to this today, a bit of a blast from the past. Jean-Claude Juncker, the former President Commission, he's really urging all sides to step back from what he called a stupid vaccination war. And within that, it seems he's urging the Commission really to dial down the language, to try and take some heat out of this situation. He thinks that a vaccine war would be disastrous in the short term, and that also it would really affect the reputation of the European Union.
That was Nick Beake. People in England aged over 50 and in at-risk categories are being urged to book their COVID-19 jabs before next Monday, when experts are predicting the number of vaccination slots will dip. Officials expect a slowdown in vaccine supplies in April, and medics will be focusing on providing second doses. This from our health correspondent Naomi Grimley.
Book while you can. That's the message to the over 50s and those in at-risk groups who are being urged to secure their jabs as soon as possible. Some vaccination centres will be temporarily closed in April due to looming supply issues, and the government is keen to focus minds in the most vulnerable groups before that happens.
We've got very high coverage amongst the over 70s, more than 90%. But in other groups, there are less figures of less coverage, and we do need to reach out to those groups and persuade and make vaccines easily accessible in order that they take up immunisation.
Over 28 million people have had at least one jab, but now, of course, many of those require specially timed second doses, so they'll take priority in the next month. New research from Warwick University and Public Health England says it's already saved at least 6,000 lives, mostly in older age groups, between the first vaccinations in December and the end of February. But we're still living with huge uncertainty. Foreign travel, for example, remains a big unknown.
The biggest risk to the epidemic in the UK now would be importation from abroad. And we will have to think very hard about summer holidays and travel in the summer. But the best answer to that is to bring epidemic under control in the UK and to make vaccines available globally. And then we can get travel, we can get economics, and we can get all of our health and education back much, much faster.
In exactly 3 weeks' time, the government hopes everyone in the most vulnerable groups will have been offered a first jab. It will be a moment to celebrate, but health officials want us to know there's still a long way to go before the country can really relax. Naomi Grimley, BBC News.
The headlines here on BBC News. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, warns that coronavirus cases are likely to rise as restrictions are lifted in England, but he says people have to live with risk and he hopes to manage the virus like the flu in the future. Pub landlords in England may be able to refuse entry to customers who can't prove they've had a coronavirus vaccine. A government review is looking at the issue. EU leaders are set to discuss tougher controls on coronavirus vaccine exports as they try to boost supplies and improve distribution amongst member states, which could affect supplies to the UK. A year later than expected, and the Olympic torch has begun its 4-month journey around Japan as it heads to the delayed opening ceremony of the 2020 Summer Games. The Olympic flame was lit in Fukushima and will arrive in Tokyo in July. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes has been watching its progress.
It's a moment many had predicted would never happen. But this morning in Fukushima, a year later than planned, the runners got underway. The Olympic torch relay has begun.
This is really the point of no return. This is Japan saying to the world, this Games is going to go ahead this summer regardless of the pandemic.
For months, opinion polls have shown an overwhelming majority of Japanese are against holding these Games this year. But as the torch relay entered the city of Iwaki today, a lot of people turned out, ignoring government advice not to gather in crowds, although they did heed the advice to clap rather than to cheer. When I watched the torch go by today, it became more real for me, this lady says. But I am glad they're not going to allow spectators from abroad. I'm going to be an Olympic volunteer, this student says, so I really want them to go ahead. When the whole world is down because of the pandemic, I think the Olympics will cheer people up.
So the torch relay has now arrived in the little town of Futaba, and this town is one of them, was evacuated after the nuclear disaster at Fukushima Daiichi 10 years ago. In fact, the nuclear plant is just a few kilometers away from here. And despite all of the razzmatazz surrounding the torch relay here today, if you go just 100 meters in either direction, you'll find that this town is still completely deserted. And some of the people who come from this area are not hugely amused about the amount of money that's being spent on the Olympics when they still can't come home.
Japan has now decided it will not allow foreign spectators to come to the Games this summer. But as the Olympic flame makes its way towards Tokyo, the authorities here know they now have no hope of vaccinating Japan's population before the opening ceremony on July the 23rd. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News, in Fukushima.
A lawyer for the Russian opposition politician Alexei Navalny has described his health as extremely unfavourable, following concerns raised about his condition. Mr. Navalny was jailed last month for 2.5 years on charges he said were politically motivated. Russia's prison authority has described his condition as stable and satisfactory. His lawyer said after visiting him that he had severe back and leg pain and that he can't use one of his legs. Mr. Navalny has been a thorn in the side of the Russian authorities for years through organising anti-government protests over corruption allegations. The Nationwide Building Society is to allow 13,000 office staff to choose where they work under a new flexibility scheme. The company is closing 3 offices in Swindon with 3,000 staff either moving to the nearby headquarters, working from home or mixing the two. Managers say its Work Anywhere plan would allow employees more control of their lives. Santander has announced plans to close 111 branches across the country due to the shift to mobile and online banking. The bank said it had taken the decision because fewer customers were choosing to bank in branch. About 840 staff will be affected by the closures, although Santander promised to try to find them other jobs within the business. Johnny Depp has lost a bid to overturn a damning High Court ruling in London which concluded he assaulted his ex-wife Amber Heard and left her in fear for her life. The judge said Mr Depp had no real prospect of success and therefore is refusing permission to appeal against the ruling given last year in his libel case against the publishers of The Sun newspaper. A group of MPs has warned the government it's missed the boat on reform of the BBC licence fee. The Media Select Committee says the existing system is the only option for the foreseeable future, but ministers say they still plan to review how the BBC is funded. Scientists have launched a study to see if 2 drugs, which are already available, could be used to reduce deaths from coronavirus. The Cambridge-led trial also aims to cut the number of people who are readmitted to hospital following treatment for the disease. Our science correspondent Richard Westcott reports.
COVID has put nearly 500,000 UK people in hospital so far. Most survive, but the disease doesn't relinquish its grip just because they've been discharged. Ambulance driver Nigel's been nicknamed the Miracle Man by his doctors after nearly dying from the disease last summer.
3 cheers for Nigel! Hip, hip! Hooray! Hip, hip! Hooray! Hip, hip! Hooray!
Leaving hospital was a high point, but months later, he's still suffering.
Can't walk very far, but I do my best. Upper body strength, where I used to have that, I haven't got that anymore.
You tire easy, don't you?
I tire,
have an
yeah.
afternoon nap.
Yeah.
You've got your stomach problem.
Yeah, ulcerative colitis.
Yeah, the mental health PTSD side of it.
Yeah.
Mood swings.
Yeah.
I had COVID. I still have the loss of smell, but to me, that's nothing. I don't class that as long COVID. That's just how it is. This is long COVID because it's affecting his life.
This increasingly common long-term damage is why Cambridge researchers are launching a new UK-wide drugs trial. Led by a doctor who pushed through all the paperwork and raised the money in between shifts on intensive care. Hi Charlotte, how are you? They'll be recruiting discharged patients to try 2 common drugs.
The apixaban drug is a clot-busting drug, and we know that people who have coronavirus infection are at increased risk of getting blood clots in their lungs and their legs. So it's to try and target that in the post-hospital phase. And then atorvastatin is a cholesterol-lowering drug. One of the really important things about these 2 particular drugs is they're relatively cheap, they're easy to take because they're tablets, and they're widely available.
A large study found that for every 10 people discharged from hospital after COVID, within 6 months, 3 will be readmitted and 1 will die. Finding treatments to cut those numbers could change thousands of lives. Richard Westcott, BBC News, Clacton in Essex.
A second attempt to refloat the container ship stranded in the Suez Canal will be made later today. The ship's owner has apologised for the grounding and the effect it's had on international shipping. At least 150 vessels are currently waiting to go through the canal, which was completely blocked when the 200,000-tonne cargo ship, the Ever Given, ran aground. Theo Leggett reports.
An ocean-going giant lies stuck, its bow embedded firmly in the sandy bank of the Suez Canal, and one of the world's busiest trade arteries remains blocked for a 3rd day. The canal provides a relatively quick way for cargoes to travel between Europe and Asia, and for oil supplies to come from the Middle East. The alternative is a passage around the southern tip of Africa, which is thousands of miles further and can take more than a week longer. With the canal blocked, the backlog of ships with nowhere to go is building up.
We have ships lining up, and this is not just container ships. This is bulk carriers carrying grain cargoes as well. This is crude oil. This is oil product carrying gasoline and diesel to feed our cars.
The Ever Given is one of a very new generation of so-called megaships. Huge vessels, hundreds of meters long, capable of carrying tens of thousands of containers. The Suez Canal was built in 1859, and although it was recently expanded, it remains a very narrow and tricky prospect for such large ships.
I think the biggest concern is when there is an incident, these ships are too big for salvors to quickly and easily manage to free them. And certainly I think there needs to be a thorough audit of what went wrong and why. And at the moment, we're not really sure.
The question now is how much longer it'll take for the canal to be fully reopened. A long delay will only add to the disruption to global supply chains already caused by the COVID outbreak. And ultimately, that means potential shortages and higher costs for businesses that may already be struggling. Theo Leggett, BBC News.
Here, the new £50 note will feature the computer pioneer Alan Turing. The Bank of England says the new notes will enter circulation on the 23rd of June. Campaigners have criticised the lack of diversity, but the governor of the bank, Andrew Bailey, has said he would like the next person featured on a banknote to be from an ethnic minority. Our personal finance correspondent Kevin Peachy reports.
Alan Turing's work as code breaker helped shorten the war and save lives. Soon he'll be on the Bank of England's most secure banknote. And this is the new note, packed with security features. Here's the portrait of Alan Turing with images of his computer pioneering role. It enters circulation on the 23rd of June. Why then? Well, the clue's here on this wavy line in binary code. It's Alan Turing's date of birth in 1912 on the 23rd of June. The banknote also draws attention to his appalling treatment by the state for being gay. Today, the Bank of England's headquarters is flying the rainbow flag to celebrate diversity. But is it enough? Would you like to see someone from a diverse ethnic background on the next note?
I would. I definitely want to see, because we are very committed to diversity. So I definitely hope that one of our next banknotes will obviously feature somebody from an ethnic background, because that would be very appropriate. But I do want to emphasise, of course, that Alan Turing, in his own right, is a very strong recognition of diversity.
Alan Turing's nephew hopes this will prompt wider discussions.
I think Alan Turing would have wanted us to think about things like underrepresentation of women in science subjects, underrepresentation of black and ethnic minority kids in STEM subjects at school, and why they're not being given the opportunities that they should have, and why that's bad for all of us. These were things that I think he was quite keen on during his lifetime.
He was keen too on the idea of programming machines, and during the COVID crisis we've turned to devices rather than cash to pay for things. Would you expect next to have a digital currency rather than a banknote?
It's still very much at the sort of foundational stages, I think, because it does raise quite a lot of issues as to how it would work, how it would impact the financial system, how it impacts society more broadly.
A project fascinating anyone inspired by Alan Turing's work. Kevin Peachy, BBC News.
Now, you're watching BBC News. Let's catch up with the weather, the forecast now with Helen Willits.
Good afternoon. Sunny spells and scattered showers is how it will remain for the rest of the day. There'll be fewer showers across central and eastern areas, but there have been some and still are meandering their way across southern areas. They're more numerous, the showers, further north and west. So the temperatures are slightly down here, 10 or 11. 14s or 15s in the south, but a relatively pleasant day in the sunshine for most. However, overnight, as the showers continue, we'll also see a lengthier spell of rain on a weather front coming in. So that should alleviate any frost worries, although temperatures do fall back behind this cold weather front as we go through the latter part of the night. And colder air is introduced for tomorrow across many areas. So those showers will turn to sleet and snow. And there could even be a little bit on the moors and the hills further south by the end of the day. So temperatures will be down by 4 or 5 degrees for some. It'll certainly feel chillier tomorrow. And then we have slightly fewer showers on Saturday, but a windy and unsettled picture for the second half of the weekend. More online.
It worries me what the reception would be like if we actually won something.
His memory's not there, and it's a shame. He's had some good memories.
We took that flag back and flew it with pride. Jack Charlton did that.
I think a lot of you don't in Ireland.
You're right here.
Filmed in the last year of his remarkable life, Finding Jack Charlton, Monday at 9 on BBC Two and iPlayer.
In uncertain times, and with rapidly changing rules around the UK, we'll find the answers to your questions.
How soon after that can you hug your mum?
From experts you can trust. Send us your questions by email or using hashtag BBC Your Questions. Your questions answered from BBC News.
Do you know that I've always got the right camera, and then the last half hour of 17 years and I've picked the wrong one. Anyway, good afternoon. You're watching BBC News. I'm Simon McCoy. These are our headlines. The Health Secretary warns that coronavirus cases are likely to rise as restrictions are lifted in England, but says people have to live with risk, and he hopes to manage the virus like the flu in the future. Concern from pub landlords after the Prime Minister says it could be down to individual pubs to bar drinkers who arrive without proof of vaccination. As EU leaders meet to decide their next move over export restrictions, AstraZeneca expresses anger at being caught in the middle of the vaccine row. Over 50s and those in the at-risk categories are being urged to book their COVID-19 jabs before a predicted dip in supplies. A Royal Navy jet has crashed into a field in Cornwall. 2 pilots ejected from the plane and have been taken to hospital. A year later than planned, the torch relay for the delayed Tokyo Olympics finally gets underway in Japan. Sport, and for a full roundup, for the last time for me anyway, we go to the BBC Sports Centre and Gavin is there. Tighten your tie.
OK, all right, yeah.
Come on.
It slips a little bit, but to be honest, I'm just glad I got the right camera.
Just make a bit of effort. Try it.
All right. Because it's your last day, I'll let you have that one. Right, let's start with the football, the World Cup qualifiers. I can't believe you just did that. The World Cup qualifiers, they continue this evening. Northern Ireland have the toughest job among the home nations. Away to Italy, Scotland are home to Austria, and England face one of the smallest nations in football, San Marino. Ahead of the game, there's been talk of whether England's players will take the knee after some high-profile stars stopped the gesture, saying it's lost its meaning. The match is a milestone for manager Gareth Southgate, his 50th in charge of the national side.
It's been an absolute honour. And I suppose something I'll think about more when everything's finished, really. There'll be, numbers up on boards somewhere that will be there. So, yeah, it's a nice landmark. But, of course, my focus really is with the team and making sure that we get this World Cup qualification off to a good start.
The former Scotland captain Scott Brown will leave Celtic at the end of the season to join Premiership rivals Aberdeen. The 35-year-old has signed a pre-contract to go to Pittodrie as a player coach and will join them in the summer. Brown, who signed for Celtic from Hibernian in 2007, has played more than 600 times for Celtic and won 10 league titles and 12 domestic cups. Crewe Alexandra chairman John Bowler is standing down following the Sheldon report into child sexual abuse in football. In a statement, Bowler said, "I am satisfied with the findings of the review that found that the club did not have any knowledge of Barry Bonnell's heinous crimes. I will always be deeply appalled and sorry that those young players and their families suffered at the hands of this evil predator," he said. Well, in a statement, the Offside Trust, the organisation founded and run by survivors of child sexual abuse in sport, said it has taken several days of pressure from survivors, journalists and ultimately the club's own supporters to force this resignation. This was the very least that we should have been expected, and hopefully it clears the path for a new chapter. Ben Stokes insists the team are focused purely on winning, England that is, rather than worrying where they are in the world rankings. They play India tomorrow without captain Owen Morgan, who will miss the final 2 one-day internationals with a hand injury. Sam Billings will also be unavailable for the second game of the series, with Josh Butler again captaining the side.
Being number one is obviously a fantastic thing to have, next to your name as a team, but it's not our driving force. Our driving force is the way that we go about it and our attitude towards playing the game. And that's what's made us be successful. And the more successful we are, obviously, the more chance and the more opportunity we've got to be at number one. So our driving force is making sure we stay true to ourselves and our beliefs and how we play the game.
The official countdown to the postponed 2020 Tokyo Games is underway after the Olympic torch was lit during a scaled-down event this morning. After a brief opening ceremony, members of the 2011 Japan women's football team began the torch's 120-day journey through 859 locations. It ends with the opening ceremony on the 23rd of July. There'll be no international fans at the Games because of the coronavirus pandemic, and former British athlete Ewan Thomas admits that it's been a tough time for the athletes.
I can only imagine how tough it is. I mean, in any sport, it's not just about being physically ready, it's mentally ready as well. And the good thing about when you have an end goal, those cold winter training, the cold nights when you train, it doesn't matter because you've got that light at the end of the tunnel, you've got the Olympics to aim for. When is it going to happen, isn't it? It must be very hard to remain motivated, but I think now they can finally see it's coming.
And after spells at Wasps, Sale and Gloucester, former England fly-half Danny Cipriani has joined a new Premiership club. From May, he'll be playing for Bath after signing an extended one-year contract. Cipriani left Gloucester in December, despite reportedly signing a 3-year contract in 2019. Quick reminder, England are losing in the Under-21 International to Switzerland 1-0. Keep up with that on the BBC Sport website. But Simon, I tell you what, going back to the Cipriani theme, a comeback always on the cards, eh? Tell you what, I think you could channel some inspiration from him.
I doubt it, particularly given the performance this afternoon, Gavin. I think it's a one-way road. Anyway,
all right.
It's been a great pleasure. Paths will cross. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed. Yeah, nice one.
Cheers, Gavin. Bye. You're watching BBC News. Now, the National Stalking Helpline says it's seen a 10% increase in calls since the pandemic began, with around 20,000 people contacting the charity over the past year. Many have reported cyber stalking and the use of tracking devices. One victim has been speaking to the BBC's Emma Glaseby.
I'm never somebody that suffered from anxiety. It's not something that's impacted me, but it crippled me at times. I felt incredibly vulnerable. I live remotely and I'm on my own. I just lived every day wondering what they might be capable of next.
When she ended her relationship, her ex refused to accept it. Becky, not her real name, was then bombarded with messages and made to feel like a prisoner in her home.
I just kept seeing him everywhere that I went. I was driving along the road. He would nearly always be coming in the opposite direction. If I left the gym, he would be outside driving past.
She took her car to the garage and a mechanic discovered a tracker device fitted underneath.
I started shaking. I knew immediately that it was him. All of those events just fell into place, how he knew where I was.
In the crime survey for England and Wales, 1 in 20 women and 1 in 50 men said they'd experienced stalking in the past year. The National Stalking Helpline has seen a 10% increase in calls since the pandemic began, with almost 20,000 people contacting the charity since the first lockdown.
Victims have explained to us how they feel like sitting ducks, waiting for an incident to occur because they're not able to do normal things that they might do every day, like varying their routines. And particularly that cyber stalking component of this invasion of every facet of their lives. And that's something, that trauma that they've experienced during the lockdown, that we're going to be supporting them with, unfortunately, for some time to come.
Becky's stalker pleaded guilty in January and was jailed for 2.5 years. But it's an ordeal that's left a lasting impact on her business, her friendships and her sense of feeling safe and secure. Emma Glasby, BBC News.
And if you've been affected by any of the issues we've been talking about, go to bbc.co.uk/actionline for details of organisations offering information and support, or you can call for free at any time to hear recorded information on 0800 066 066. Pub operators and landlords have said they are concerned about the possibility of customers in England having to prove they've been vaccinated against coronavirus in order to enter hospitality venues. A review is looking into the measure as the lockdown is eased, and yesterday the Prime Minister said the decision could be left to individual landlords. But industry leaders said the plan is fraught with difficulty. Well, Emma McClarkin is the Chief Executive of the British Beer and Pub Association. And do you share that view, Emma, that there are going to be problems with this if it's introduced?
Yes, vaccine certifications in domestic venues like pubs and restaurants presents us with a serious challenge in terms of enforcement. And we are very worried about also it making us fall into discrimination when you think about those that haven't been offered a vaccine, like our younger population, or those that have been advised against a vaccine, such as pregnant women. We employ a significant amount of young people in our sector, so it may also impact us from a staffing perspective.
Is it not part of the job of a landlord, though, to spot potential trouble? If someone's had too much to drink, they bar them, they say you're not welcome in here. It goes with the territory, if you like.
but we don't have bouncers on the door like a nightclub at every bar and pub. And so that's what they're asking us to do. They're asking us to enforce this at each venue, and that is impossible for some of our venues to do, and particularly our smaller community pubs in perhaps some rural locations, to actually employ additional staff to actually deal with this additional responsibility at a time where businesses are struggling to survive. It is an unnecessary burden for them.
OK, well, let's pick up on that, because let's face it, if pubs were told you can reopen if you do this, you're going to grab any opportunity to reopen you can, aren't you?
Well, we do open our doors on the 12th of April, and we certainly haven't been given an indication from the government that this scheme will be up and running in time for that opening on the 12th of April. Of course, we open indoors on the 17th of May, and we await to see the terms upon which they allow us to do that. But the reality is they promised that all restrictions of social contact would fall away by the 21st of June. And this is indeed a big restriction that they would be asking us to put into place and to enforce at a great cost to our businesses and our personal relationship with our customers. So we are very nervous about the damage that this could do to us and actually the future of the Great British Pub.
Aren't some customers going to be slightly happier to come into a pub if they think that there is this sort of check on people who have had vaccines, who have had a negative test, because it's not just those who've been vaccinated we're talking about, but for the other customers, wouldn't this actually be a positive?
Well, in order to open, we have already had to fulfil COVID secure measures and have invested over 500 million as a sector in making our venues COVID secure, not only for our customers, but also for our staff. And we're just envisaging how difficult this would be to actually implement when we would be forced to make choices between different groups. You know, if your granddad arrives as part of a family, but he's forgotten his vaccination passport, we don't let him in. If it is an online application and they don't have a smartphone, do we refuse entry then? It is a very difficult position to put our publicans in, on top of the responsibilities that they do have under their licensing. So it is a very difficult moment for businesses. We need to support them the best that we can at this moment. They will not be making profit while they're operating under any restrictions. So adding in this one in exchange for the removal of others is simply still adding a burden to them they cannot carry.
Emma, how would you assess the mood of pub landlords, those involved in the sector? Because we all, gosh, some more than most, we all want pubs to reopen. But what do you sense about the readiness now for people just to try and get things back to some sort of normality?
Well, this has been a devastating time for our businesses. We lost 2,000 pubs. That's 5% of pubs last year. 5 pubs closing every day. We certainly don't want to see a decline in the Great British Pub in those great numbers. People are holding on and surviving through this closure by their very fingertips. So all of this announcements dropping into conversations that we may be having additional obligations put upon us makes them extremely anxious. And we really hope that the government will give fuller consideration to this to help these businesses survive. They have done their part in the pandemic. We still have to have COVID secure venues in place, and we are complying with that. Anything on top of that is really going to break the back of these pubs that have been through enough.
Emma, really good to talk to you. Emma McClarkin, thanks so much for your time this afternoon. Now, just to bring some news from the NHS Chief Executive, Sir Simon Stevens, NHS England, who says that the emergency preparedness, resilience and response alert levels should be reduced, in his view, from 4 to 3 because of what he calls reduced acute pressures on the health service. This came during a board meeting of the NHS England. He said we had over 34,000 severely ill coronavirus patients in our hospitals in mid-January. That number is now 4,000. Still more than 400 more COVID patients than we had this same time a year ago, he says, but suggesting it's time to bring down the EPRR alert level from level 4 to level 3. And he said that should take effect from today. We'll have more on that a little later on. Just to bring you a bit of art news. From France. We're just hearing that Vincent van Gogh, pays your money, takes your choice, a painting by Vincent, anyway, of a Paris street scene that had been held in a private collection for over a century has sold for 14 million euros. This is at Sotheby's. They set an estimated value of between 5 and 8. They got that wrong, didn't they? It's gone for 14 million euros. It's a street scene in Montmartre, painted in 1887, while the artist was lodging with his brother Theo in the French capital. You heard it here first. You're watching BBC News. Let's bring you some news coming down from Cornwall. We're just hearing that 2 pilots who are undergoing medical checks after they ejected from a British military jet in southwest England, the plane later crashing into a field. Cornwall Ambulance Service said the pilots did not sustain life-threatening injuries, and the Ministry of Defence has said an investigation will start into the incident, which involved a Royal Navy Hawk aircraft that was based not far from the site of the crash in Helston, which is on the tip of England's most westerly point. The retail giant H&M is facing a backlash in China after the company expressed concern about the alleged use of forced Uyghur labour in the production of cotton in Tianjin. In a statement last year, H&M said that it was deeply concerned by reports of forced labour and discrimination against Xinjiang's Muslim minorities. Yesterday, the Chinese Communist Youth League posted this message on social media, saying spreading rumours to boycott cotton while wanting to make money in China. Wishful thinking, they said. Shortly after, H&M disappeared from 2 of China's major shopping platforms. Chinese state television released photos mocking the H&M logo, calling it ridiculous, and Chinese celebrities have ended their ties with the retailer. Well, Western countries imposed sanctions on China this week over their treatment of the Uyghur minority. Our correspondent in Shanghai, Robin Brandt, has been following developments.
H&M is big here in Shanghai. It's big across China. This is one of its multitude of locations in this country. But what's striking about what we've seen in the last 24 hours is how quickly and how all of a sudden, apparently, this campaign led by celebrity endorsers and led by some arms of the ruling Communist Party has come out of nowhere. And also what's so striking is how it's gathered pace in a matter of hours. So this is all about H&M's proclamation going back last year, which you just referred to, saying it wanted to purge its supply chain of cotton that was used and harvested in Xinjiang. That's the western province in China, where China is accused of abuses against the Muslim minority there. Genocide is actually how now President Biden's administration has classified the abuses going on. So what's most intriguing is that all of a sudden, just a few days after coordinated sanctions were imposed by the UK, the US and the European Union, we have arms of the Communist Party, the celebrity endorsers, happy to take H&M's money up until now, all of a sudden coming out of nowhere, bailing on the company and encouraging others to do the same. In the other end of the scale, you have retailers like Muji, the Japanese retailer. We just bought this shirt there this morning. On the label, this actually refers to Xinjiang cotton. So they're at the other end of the scale in terms of what's going on. But look, it's very serious. This kind of effort to use its economic clout, this kind of retail nationalism, is a very familiar tactic employed by China, employed by the party, employed by its government. And it's serious. Just ask the South Koreans. Their chain store Lotte suffered very seriously in years gone by over a diplomatic spat. Just ask the Philippines as well, the government there. Its fruit exports suffered seriously here. That was all about a diplomatic spat between its governments.
That was Robin Brandt reporting there. This is BBC News, the headlines this afternoon. The Health Secretary warns that coronavirus cases are likely to rise as restrictions are lifted in England, but says people have to live with risk, and he hopes to manage the virus like the flu in the future. Pub landlords in England may be able to refuse entry to customers who can't prove they've had a coronavirus vaccine. A government review is looking at the issue. And EU leaders are set to discuss tougher controls on coronavirus vaccine exports as they try to boost supplies and improve distribution amongst member states, which could affect supplies to the UK. A major report by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature has revealed that Africa's elephants are far more threatened than previously thought. Decades of decline caused by poaching and an ongoing loss of their habitat have driven forest elephants and savanna elephants into the 2 highest categories of extinction threat. Victoria Gill reports.
The largest land animals on Earth. but their size has not protected them from the impacts of poaching or from the continued destruction of the vast swathes of interconnected habitat they need. This latest red list of threatened species, considered to be the comprehensive report on how nature is faring on an increasingly crowded planet, puts Africa's savanna elephants into the endangered category. Forest elephants are now even closer to extinction, critically endangered.
It is an alarm bell for us. So there are two main reasons for these declines. One is poaching of these animals for the ivory, and the second one is habitat loss through human activities that take place in total disregard of the needs of these animals.
Across Africa, there are now just over 400,000 wild elephants. And this latest examination of decades of census data and habitat surveys has shown that the demand for ivory still drives a decline in their numbers. The level of threat they faced had also been masked by the fact that the African elephant was previously thought to be a single species. This is the first time the savanna and forest elephant has been assessed separately. What does it mean practically to have this information about their status? How do you use that to protect these animals and reverse these declines?
While on the surface of it looks bleak, the fact that it's being flagged is actually positive, because then it means we can do something about it. And also separating the species, I think that's also positive, because it means we can do something about it on a more concentrated level.
The loss of species and natural spaces is happening all around the world, but conservationists are confident that this wake-up call could ensure that these giant icons of African wildlife get the protection and the space that they need. Victoria Gill, BBC News.
We'll stay with extinction because I'm off. The future's here.
Yes, I'm here. Actually, I wasn't meant to be here, but Martine's off sick today, so I've got...
That's interesting.
So I've got the unenviable task of saying goodbye. I have breaking news, because you're leaving us.
I am, yeah.
Which I'm very sad about. They're sad about it out there as well. You wouldn't believe it.
I know, I've seen all the champagne.
They are drinking champagne. I don't know what that says about you, but...
I know, they all seem quite happy about it.
How
anyway.
many years has it been?
17 and a half.
17 and a half years, man and boy. Well, we're very sad about it, and I'm sure many, many viewers out there are sad about it as well, because you've been a large...
They're not happy.
They are, because you've been a large part at Afternoon Live. Shall we have a walk, hand in hand,
Yeah,
down
like
memory
I have
lane?
a choice. Well, let's
have a look.
Good morning and welcome to BBC News. Plans for privately run drunk tanks to tackle alcohol-fueled disorder have been backed by police chiefs. Under the proposals, drunk troublemakers will be taken to cells run by private firms and have to pay for it once they've sobered up. Well, plenty more to come from here, of course. None of it news, because that'll come from Buckingham Palace. But that won't stop us. We'll see you later. Rachel.
Simon, glad to hear it. Thanks very much indeed, Simon McCoy there for us.
Now, you're watching BBC News. Just bear in mind it is August. This does not look like a walk in the park. Dog owners and their pets in California have hit the waves in the second annual World Dog Surfing Championships. Here are the pictures.
There's also style.
There are also prizes for the best dressed and tandem surfing dogs. The winner, of course, being crowned top dog. That's a shame. We've run out of pictures.
We're now coming to the big dip. Hold tight.
Well, anyway, I'm just interested because you've helped coordinate this campaign. Sorry, Boris, just a second. You helped coordinate this Labour campaign.
And his feebleness in the Brexit negotiations.
Just a second.
Sorry, he's just been shouting in my ear.
Well, but a piece. Eric, it's a great pleasure to meet you. Eric Sharden, thank you so much.
Have you finished? You finished now?
I have. Great pleasure to meet you.
So what will you do with this?
Well, we're still on. I've got a bit of work to do.
You'll take a bit of it. Stick it in.
You've just been on live across the nation. I should have warned you of that beforehand.
Now you tell me.
Now I tell you. Thank you so much. It was really great to see you. Very good afternoon to you. I think it's still afternoon. You're watching Afternoon Live from BBC News.
Is there any reason why...
Someone with a sense of humour there.
Is there any reason why every director in that box has grey hair?
Well, it's because most of them are quite old. I should mention we're losing Paul Risley, who's a director who I've worked with for many years here, and we'll miss him as well. I'm just watching that because, yeah, we cover serious stuff, but perhaps the most remarkable thing I've ever done is the annual D-Day commemorations at Aramosh and talking to veterans. Do you know, we have a fantastic job. We meet some amazing people. Sorry, I get choked up.
Yeah.
Just watching the interview.
I know.
You meet fabulous
We are the
people.
luckiest people
Yeah,
sometimes.
we are.
I'm going to tell an anecdote, because we go back all the way to the Lebanon War. Do you remember this?
I do.
And we were working in an office together, and it was a rather posh office, actually.
Yeah, they had a fish tank.
It had a fish tank. We had a fish tank in the middle of the office. And as the war progressed, I realised that no one in the BBC was actually feeding these fish. And so I started to feed them. And Simon thought this was very funny because they were dying one by one through the course of the war. And
well, I don't think it was that funny.
But as we went forward...
I could be sacked for this. Oh, it doesn't matter.
As we went forward... Every two-way I did, every time you interviewed me, there was always a fish reference which took us back to these times in Lebanon. So it would be, give us a sense of place, Christian, or it would be, is there a porpoise to this two-way? And so we bonded over that and we formed a friendship. But you've been a really good colleague, and I, for one, will very much miss you, and I know everybody out there is going to miss you as well.
Thank you very much. The important people, and I think what we in the news channel certainly have done, is the audience. And in Afternoon Live, I think we built up people who just liked what we did, trusted us, and I will miss the BBC hugely. It is a remarkable place. And yes, we've put the audience first, and I think that's been really important.
Most people get a gold clock, but you get a block of A4 paper.
Do you know, it is the nature of this business. You're remembered for things like that. I'll be remembered for surfboarding dogs, standing outside that wretched hospital, talking about something that wasn't news. Do you know, when I spoke to William afterwards, and he just said, we love the baby stuff. And I'm standing with Prince William, and I said, Your Royal Highness, you mean the birth of your son? He said, yeah, it was great. He said, we were watching inside and you got it just right. Yeah. And, you know, all the papers are saying, oh, how dare they. I think we've just touched, I think, the mood. I hope that's what we've done. And it's been a great privilege to work here.
And they called him George and not Simon.
There's still time.
Do you want to do the honours? Do you want to throw us to the weather for the last time?
I'm going to the wrong camera, but that's partly because Paul Rice is directing and he's never been very good. Here with the weather for the last time, it's Helen Willits. Thank you.
Thank you very much for some fantastic throws over the years as well. If you are stepping out the door, we do have some showers around at the moment. Some sunshine as well, a very spring-like sort of day, and that sort of weather that we've had through the day will just continue on its merry way throughout the rest of the afternoon. So some showers across southern England as well. They've been on and off around the London region, right the way across towards Somerset as well. Then we've got all this shower activity further north as west. There's some heavy ones in there. There's some hail and thunder in there as well. But equally, between the showers, we've got some spells of sunshine, and temperatures have responded to that strengthening March sunshine to 14 or 15 degrees in the south, 12s in the north in the sunshine. The showers just keep going as we head through the night. In fact, they merge into a longer spell of rain. This is a cold weather front heading our way for tonight and tomorrow. So with all the cloud and with the wind strengthening, we should be largely frost-free, but it will feel much colder by the end of the night in the northwest because our cold weather front is introducing, you guessed it, cold air. So we're going to see a temperature drop tomorrow for most of us and definitely a cooler feel. So there's some sunshine and some showers ahead of our weather front then for most of us, 2 or 3 hours of rain, some quite heavy rain on that weather front and blustery winds as well, a windier day tomorrow. Then some sunshine follows, but the showers progressively will be more of sleet and snow over the hills and even the hills in southern areas potentially by the time we get to the evening. So look at the temperatures after the 12s today, just 8 in the north. Still hanging on to double figures just about in the south because we've got that morning rain with us, which clears away eventually tomorrow evening. Then it's then clear spells and showers. I mentioned the fact they could be wintry further south, certainly so. So a colder night, widespread frost across the north. In the south as well, we could see some frost in rural areas because we've got high pressure building into the start of Saturday. Saturday night, though, brings in some more wet and windy weather. That's starts to push its way southwards during Sunday as well. So a bit of a mixed bag this weekend. Saturday looking like the drier day of the two for many areas, but there's still quite a bit of cloud around. I wouldn't like to rule out a few drizzly showers here and there, and then more rain coming in later in the day. But temperatures perhaps recovering a little bit on Saturday, given the fact that you've got a southwesterly. But then by Sunday, and at this stage, we're not sure about the detail, but it looks as if that weather front's pushing southwards. And again, we return to showers in the north. Stay up to date, of course, here on the channel.